ends with a passage or, a phrase, something that his father had said in his prison stay at Jackson, Mississippi prison, something like that. So this in particular is actually his final statement. So he said, "I didn't want to stay with one woman long because there was always new pleasures to be found with every different type of woman. Finally, one night when I was drinking heavy, I decided to go and steal my stepfather's car. When I returned it, it was ruined, and later when my stepfather discovered his car, he and Mom came looking for me. They accused me of taking the car, but I maintained a stand of innocence. They asked me if I would be willing to tell the police what I had told them, and I said I would." When confronted with the police, they were going to lock me up, so I broke and ran and made my good escape. I went to Salt Lake City to live with my older sister Betty, but after a while, I came back to California to see my girlfriend. All the while I was away, a warrant had been issued for my arrest, and upon entering Hawthorne, my old friend saw me and told the cops that I was in town. I was hitchhiking over to my girlfriend's when I saw these plainclothesmen drive up. They recognized me at once, and I started to run. Once one of the cops got out of the car and fired 3 shots at me. None of the shots hit me, and again, I made good my escape. After hiding out for a while, I flagged a car down, and he gave me a ride near my girl's house. After seeing her, I asked her if she wanted to live with me in Salt Lake City. She said yes, and at once began to pack her things. It was then a knock sounded on the door, and parked outside was 3 cars and 7 cops. I ran and hid in her closet, and the cops searched the house from all corners and were unable to find me. When the cops were finally giving up in disgust, one of the wise cops decided to take another look in the closet where I was hiding. They finally found me hiding in there, but it took all 7 of those cops to put cuffs on me. So, sorry about that. So, with chapter 1, Charlene cleaned the van when they returned to Reno, washing it and laundering the bedding, and resumed her life with Gerald. The hatred she had felt for him that night beside the little stream that was fed by a spring some 50 miles northeast of Lovelock was buried deep in her subconscious mind. The emotion that flared then ebbed and was gone or submerged to a point where it was forgotten. The girl with the long brown hair was one of a series of pictures painted recently in her mind that she did not care to inspect too often. Life changed for the 2 of them. Two of them. A little of the passion was missing. He was using the name Stephen File, and once he slipped a little in front of the young sales manager and his wife. Later, Charlene told the young man that Jerry was not using his real name, and it was a little secret they shared and enjoyed. The feeling toward the young sales manager persisted, but she was seeing him too often, to the point where once, when Jerry saw the van and her friend was driving it, he became furious. Slowly, the relationship with the young man cooled before ever being consummated. So, they never hooked up, they never banged. Gerald found a new job, driving a delivery truck for a soft drink company in Reno on July 2nd. 2 days later, he and Charlene and the young sales manager and his wife watched the fireworks in Reno. Later that month, registered with the Meat Cutters Union and worked fairly steadily, mostly for the large, locally owned supermarket. And this was the same chain that had brought her dad in the first place to Sacramento from, I believe, Stockton. Yeah, Stockton. They lived as Mr. and Mrs. Stephen File and quickly became friendly with the young couple that was living over in the next apartment. The young man admired Jerry's collection of guns, which included an AR-15 rifle, a .357 Colt Python, an over and under Derringer, as well as a gleaming Chrome 38. Jerry applied for a California's driver's license as Stephen File, and on November 1st, he actually worked a little more than 2 weeks and then moved. Charlene found work also, which involved like traveling for another food distributing organization among the cities that she visited throughout like Reno and stuff. She was always going around. So through October and November, Jerry worked as a driver for a valley trucking firm, driving a route which took him from the San Francisco Bay Area all throughout, Northern California. And there were times when he was gone overnight and he would tell Charlene that his business kept him there. Yeah. Sure. That's what they all say. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so, it was almost Christmas, December 21st, 1979, when Jerry went to work as a bartender in North Sac, and he was working there for a while. It was one of the longest jobs he had ever held, actually, and for reasons he never bothered to explain to Charlene, he always introduced her as his girlfriend whenever she would come and visit, and everybody knew, all the patrons, the regulars knew it was because he was seeing other women. So, Jerry was a good bartender in many regards, and he developed this following in North Sac at this bar, and men liked him. Some women were attracted to him, and his knowledge of the bartender's Bible was profound enough to satisfy the plebeian tastes of his customers. I can hear my son. Hold on a second. So, thank you for letting me go check and make sure he was okay. He's obviously being watched, but I just wanted to I could just hear him saying mommy. I don't know if you could hear that, but I think he was looking for me. I said, hey, I'm gonna go upstairs and do a video, so just give me some time. So if you hear little toddler sounds, I can't really help it. He's my little nugget. He's down there, so Evelyn Smith, blonde, blue-eyed, slender, and baroque, moved into Jerry's life on February 20th, 1980. She never forgot the date or the events of the evening when she walked into the North Sacramento bar and a relationship with the steppy bartender began. She was a little depressed at the time and began talking with Jerry while she put away enough drinks to make her feel a little woozy by 2 o'clock in the morning when he had to close the place down. So Jerry had asked her, come to this cafe, come have breakfast with me. So they stayed up all night, like 8 hours, and they talked and just drank coffee. So he told her then that he had been married and was divorced, and asked if she had nothing else to do, if she would go for a little ride with him. Now this is not one of his victims. This is just a girl that he was seeing for a little while. Not to give anything away, but just letting you know, she is not a victim in this case. She is a victim to a weirdo, but she was not someone who he had taken the life of. So she rode with him in a silver-colored Oldsmobile until 4 in the morning when he dropped her off at her parents' home, her current address, and suggested that they meet again. So long story short, they met again, they had breakfast again, and rode off into the sunset, made love, all of those things, and no matter what, his sex drive was so insatiable, he just couldn't get enough, even though he had Charlene at home and this other girl, Evelyn Smith. He still could not ever get those thoughts out of his mind about those fantasies of doing his, murder whole thing again. So, there was a problem, of course. Evelyn's family did not share the love for Jerry when he was introduced to them. maybe she was going through some stuff with her parents. We don't know, but she escaped. But Jerry had paid the rent, so she left. He had not, of course, given up Charlene completely. Somewhere he found the strength to spend part of the night with Evelyn and get up and then go home back to Charlene. So he'd stay like half the night over with his first girlfriend and then go back to his wife. So the time would come when he would leave Charlene and he would be all to this other girl, is kind of what Evelyn was thinking. She's thinking, okay, I know he's leaving, I know he's married, but I know something's going on. She didn't care that he lied. She ended up finding out, but she didn't care that he lied. And she would just have this thought, one day he's going to end up with me. But, that didn't happen. Charlene was not always home to welcome her husband. Her job took a lot of time out of her day. She didn't have a lot of time to stay at home. She drove around for her job, so she was gone a lot. But her job took her over this wide area, and she traveled north as far as Medford and east to Winnemucca, Nevada, with stops in Reno as well. The drive from there to Winnemucca was long and tiresome through the high desert, with only a few small towns scattered many miles apart, peeking through, the sagebrush scenery. It's trying to paint a photo here. Among these was Lovelock, the county seating in near kind of Pershing County area. It was huddled next to I-80, where it skirts the Humboldt Sink and the valley around it. Charlene never thought much about Lovelock, except that the word was out about the danger of speeding tickets over there. She welcomed the sink, sprawling for miles and growing onto a huge alkali lake because it broke the endless scenery of sagebrush, juniper, and rolling hills. 50 miles northeast of town, long before she reached Winnemucca, she passed the graveled road leading to the hills and the little stream with its wash that cut through the sagebrush and two shallow, unmarked graves. Charlene drove fast past there, keeping her mind on her job on towards Winnemucca. So she literally had to drive past this place where she knew that her husband had killed and buried these women. Girls, sorry. Spring came to the Sacramento Valley. The dual fog lifted and the rains were more gentle and less frequent. Lupin bloomed dark blue, almost purple in the green meadows beside Slaughhouse, and desert flowers blossomed north of Lovelock. Gerald Gallego, despite his passionate affair with Evelyn Smith, began talking about his fantasies. The urge was developing again, and it was one that he would not ignore. March 26th, 1980. Charlene, following Jerry's instructions, applied for a .25 caliber Beretta automatic pistol at a Sacramento sporting goods store. April 14th, 1980. Charlene picked up the Beretta Jetfire. She bought some .25 caliber ammunition the same day, but at another store. That afternoon, the gun and the ammunition were taken by Charlene to Jerry over at his bar, so she got all this stuff, and went up to his bar and gave him the gun and the ammunition. That evening, on the way home, she had a fender bender accident after leaving the bar. Not very sly. Neither the cars, their drivers, nor any passengers were hurt, but Charlene reflected that things were beginning to go bad at this point. This is where she starts to see, okay, now it's really, really taking a bad turn for the worst. She had been enjoying life despite the frequent separations from Jerry, but because she was having them, she probably was having a good life because of those separations. So now to Chapter 2, Book 3. Jerry was different, always hard to live with. He had suddenly become impossible. There was no predicting his moods. He went with Charlene to the club where he worked in the early spring of 1980 on an evening when they had been, getting on well. But for no reason, his disposition completely changed, and he just flip switched on her to the point where when they were at the intersection of Howe and American River, she just bolted out of the car. She could not handle being near him. She hated him pretty much at this point. She just told him, I can't live with you anymore. I'm done. But when the temperamental storm had passed, of course, she calmed, and outwardly at least, they had gone home together later. But the relationship was changing very rapidly. Jerry wouldn't leave her alone. Whatever she was doing was wrong. It was a constant thing. Charlene wondered if there was someone else and found herself almost hoping that there was, which there was. were all slowly being replaced by hatred and disgust. So this love was now flipping to hate. But despite that, she still stayed with him, and perhaps because she was bound by these 4 murders that she was involved in with him. April 24th, 1980, Jerry's fantasies had passed to the point of madness again. He made plans with Charlene, made sure that she had brought a shovel, a hammer, and something which would substitute for a rope were all prepared in the van. So they drove to Tower Records, almost like across the street from the Country Club Plaza, and this is kind of near where they abducted Rhonda Scheffler and Kippy Vaught, but those girls had been kidnapped 15 months prior to this, so they were kind of in that same region again. It's too early, honey, Charlene told Jerry when he was disappointed by the sparse foot traffic at the record store, a favorite place for teenagers. Everybody is in school, she said. He instructed her, just find a girl. You're not being paid to think. I don't think she was getting paid anyway, but he just told her it might be the best idea that they turned around and went back to the Country Club Plaza. And she shrank from the idea. Then he instructed her to think of some place where she could find a girl. The incongruity didn't escape Charlene. A moment or so ago, he had told her she wasn't paid to think, and now he's like telling her to think. She's like, what do you want from me, dude? She thought she wanted him to leave her alone, and just leave her alone. Charlene was absolutely just sick of it all. And these blows to her ribcage were just becoming open punches that nobody cared. Nobody cared to see. He just didn't care. Nobody cared. And earlier in the day, he had thrown her cat outside. The cat that was basically her like stand-in child. Got rid of her cat like it was an indoor cat. Throw it out. The cat's gone. If anybody I dated did that, done so. I'm moving out. You don't do that to animals. That's just evil. You don't hurt animals. You don't abandon them. You don't get rid of them. I don't care how much you hate the other person or what they did to you. You don't do that. Okay. PSA. I love animals, by the way, if you can't tell. So she decided then that he was just becoming this cruel person. Not after he raped, not after he murdered people, but after he took her beloved kitty out and got rid of it. Now she's starting to think he's cruel. That part blows my mind. So she just couldn't stand being near him, and she was just really over it. Back in the hills northeast of Lovelock, where the bodies of Brenda Judd and Sandra Colley were lying in unmarked, undiscovered graves somewhere in the sagebrush thicket, she had decided that she hated him. As the months passed, she reached the point where she just couldn't stand him, and nothing was real with him. He was heartless and sick, just sick. She couldn't stand him and wanted him to leave her alone. They drove away from Tower Records and Country Club Plaza to a place where she roused herself from her resentful Riviere long enough to see where they were approaching a white building with red and yellow flags, kind of announcing an opening of something. And this happened to be the Sunrise Mall. So they decided to go into the Sunrise Mall and kind of perused around. She actually went around and ended up finding 2 girls. So they sat down and looked at a couple of the department stores and walked into the mall and saw that there were a couple of girls, and he just looked at Charlene and he goes, go do it, and he said. She was back in that other world again, watching herself from a different plane while she wandered numbly through the mall, deadly and depressed, a killer without a cause. A solitary thought was single-tracking through her mind then. It was happening again. It was happening all over again. And there was nothing she could do about it. This is what she convinced herself, that there was no turning back and there was nothing she could do. So the security guards roamed through the center, a solitary patrol car east through the parking lot and back to the street. Charlene just ignored them and didn't cause any kind of ruckus. But in her purse, she had this 25 caliber Ruger. There were small security guards. I mean, some were muscular, but she just said that they were all kind of scattered throughout the mall. All Charlene remembered was that she had to find a girl, another girl, for Jerry's stingy fantasy. The Ruger remained in her purse. The guards were not disturbed by her, like I was saying. The girls were standing near the window of a department store with shopping bags in their hands. One was slim, with with straight dark brown hair, the other blonde. She was really slim, but they were all the same. All of them looked alike, really. They resembled her to a degree, which was freaky. She went about to task with automated efficiency, talking about an agency, asking them what they did, how they spent their time, while she strolled past them and talked with them. They went over past this fountain where Jerry was kind of sitting and waited for them to kind of get further by, and he decided to then kind of freakishly follow them behind. So she had walked these girls over to the car, and with talking to them, she realized that these were girls that wouldn't be missed, and one was a runaway, and the other one was someone who, if she didn't show up to something, her mom was supposed to pick her up and her friend up, but she said, oh, if my mom doesn't see me, it's fine, like, no one's gonna be looking for me, but we'll see about that. When they got to the car, Gerald was sitting there, and he said, "Hi there, girls." The young woman responded with a pleasant greeting while Jerry entered the van and moved toward the front seat, motioning for Charlene to close the curtains over the rear windows while he passed her. While she obeyed, he lifted the top of the cabinet near the side doors and produced the .357 Python, which he pointed at the young girl. "You girls are being kidnapped," he said quietly. And so now we're going to go to chapter 3. And I'm going to take a sip of water. So for chapter 3, there had been tears on each of the previous occasions when the other girls were kidnapped. Terror clouded the girls' faces. This time it was different. Charlene could feel the difference. The dark, slender girl became very quiet and leaned back against the van as if though to, be waiting for, what's next, what's the next development. And she watched and listened but talked very little. That'd probably be me. I would just be looking at everything, taking everything in and not saying much. The one with the lighter hair, asked questions. She was curious and almost eager. It seemed to Charlene the girl was thinking a new adventure loomed over the horizon, and she was curious about what was going to happen next. Before they were bound, Jerry, python in hand, sat down and chatted with them. He asked the girls about themselves and what they did and where they came from. Charlene, moving into the dual dream world in which she lived through these episodes, had trouble getting out of this situation and, getting everything into focus. Even the serene, sensible Charlene, who watched calmly from a dispassionate distance, had difficulty absorbing what was going on. Jerry and one of the two girls were talking like old friends while he found out all the things that he needed to know. The light-haired girl who was visiting her friend had run away from home and was staying with her friend, like I was saying, and she lived in Reno, and her parents would not immediately know that she was gone. The young lady with the dark hair was scheduled to meet her mother, but she had missed other such appointments. Her failure to appear would not cause any immediate concern. Even in that strange situation, with her knowledge of the inevitable macabre ending in this adventure, a whisper of snobbery touched Charlene's mind. The girls, she thought, were typical North Sacramento girls. Very aggressive. Not the type of people that she grew up with. It's so funny. It's funny because I'm from northern Sacramento. The formalities ended and Jerry got down to business. He drove toward I-80, stopping long enough on the way to hop into a telephone booth, call the club where he was supposed to be working that night, and telling them that he was ill and he wasn't going to make it. Then they found a ramp and drove onto I-80, moving east toward the Sierra Nevada and Reno. The girls were bound by then and lying face down on the bed. The morbid cradle where Rhonda Scheffler, Kippy Vaught, Brenda Judd, and Sandra Colley all rested before embarking on an unscheduled tour into eternity. They passed Baxter, and a familiar sign pointing the way to this frontage road off-ramp caught Charlene's eyes and checked off a memory in her mind. Sadness and despair occupied her thoughts as the van moved up the steep highway through the tall pines, traveling an even 55 miles an hour with Jerry driving. Her memory asked her a question while she watched the Highway Maintenance Corporation yards drop beneath them and glanced at the two teenagers on the bed. Doomed children, too young, too innocent, and too confident to be afraid. "How do you ever get out? How do you ever get out?" she asked the other Charlene the question, the dispassionate part of her who escaped from her body and watched these things happen from a safe and intangible seat just inside the sapphires, pink, and carnelian in every shade of red. Patches of snow at the roadside became an icy wall that hemmed in the broad, twisting byway, and the warmth of the valley was gone, replaced by the chilly bite of the Sierra. Springtime. Over Donner Summit they rolled, where die-hard skiers warmed themselves up with hot buttered rum at the bar in Soda Springs. Then down the steep east wall of the Sierra, where the long shadows of the mountains blotted out the afternoon sun, and it was cold, 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 so that Charlene shivered as she sat and she watched the girl with the eyelid blouse, who she thought she must be freezing at the frosted air swiping through the geometric pattern on her garment. Beyond Donner Lake, I-80 followed the banks of the Truckee River as it rolled east toward Reno, swollen and murky with the springtime runoff. The road dropped, then ascended a slight elevation, cut through a hill at the end of the mountain valley, and Reno sprawled below them, gilded, shining city of sin, wearing jewels of sapphire and ruby neon signs as the afternoon waned, and sparkling in places where windows in tall buildings caught the fading rays of a descending sun. They stopped in Reno, a very short stop, with Jerry watching and threatening every moment, and then drove on. He drove on through the sunset north and east along the narrow canyon toward the Humboldt Sink, following the Truckee River as it rolled and rolled toward the thirsty sands which would drink and swallow the snow-born torrent. 90 miles northeast of Reno, they reached Lovelock and stopped in an ancient white stucco service station where Jerry bought gas, issuing warnings as he left the cab. Like, you better not do anything, you better not try anything. Don't misbehave, He said, I know you're not stupid. I know you're not going to do anything stupid like yelling or making noises, Jerry warned. He made it very clear that they would not live to see Lovelock city limits if they didn't follow the instructions. The service station attendant was not suspicious, and nothing ever happened in Lovelock except for a fatal accident on I-80 now and then. Jerry filled the van with gas and then drove on out of Lovelock 15 miles, give or take a couple, until he reached the Oriana turnoff. He turned off I-80 then, straight east toward the hills along a graveled road Charlene recognized immediately. This had actually been a camping ground that they had gone to with this other family. Remember the guy that she was kind of seeing and kind of liked? His wife, their kids, Jerry, they all went camping there. And almost 5 miles along the road, as it reached the hills, a stand of cottonwood, rare in that part of Nevada, rises beside the bed of a lively little stream that flows down the hills to the valley floor in a meeting with the Humboldt River. The stream bed is broad and lined with brush, but the water withdraws to its center when the winter runoff is over. Remember that. So it is a beautiful little oasis as Nevada scenery goes, and popular with the people of Pershing County as a picnic area on warm summer weekends. On chilly weekday nights in springtime, it was very deserted though. Jerry parked the van, and when he did, Charlene got out and walked off by herself in the deep twilight. She didn't like the dark, like I was saying. She hated it. She absolutely hated it. And since that night in Baxter and Slaw House off the old Jackson Road, she was more afraid of hearing and seeing what was going on in that van that nightfall, which was dropping very fast, very quickly. After some time, Gallego called back to her when she sat in the cab, frightened as she had never been before. It was dark in the van, absolutely dark, and she could hear the girls breathing behind her. There was nothing and no sound except this complete silence in the girls' breathing, so she turned up the radio really loud so she couldn't hear them. The girls would not be breathing long. Even if Jerry had not told her he had gone to dig their graves, she would have been sure they would not be far from death. that she wouldn't have to do it. Then he made another offer. "Do you want them?" he asked. "He's sick," she was thinking. "He's terribly, terribly sick." She told him she didn't want the girls, and not the way he meant wanting them. Then he admitted he felt guilty. Jerry told Charlene he felt bad because she never got anything out of these affairs. "I don't want anything out of it," she was thinking. "I don't want anything out of it. I don't want anything to do with these women. I don't want anything." Gallego went to the rear doors of the van and pulled one of the girls out. He dragged her by her feet over the top of the other girl, talking the whole time, saying things like, "Come on over the top of your friend here. Move on over. Now move." Charlene turned the volume of the radio all the way up as high, as she could get it. She didn't want to hear or see anything. He moved off into the shadows, carrying the hammer and leading the girl he had just dragged from the van. A short time later, he returned for the second girl. Over the blaring radio, Charlene could hear the van door slam as Jerry took the girl away into the darkness over by this grave, by the creek. The hammer was still in his hand, and when he had come back, he wasn't gone very long, and when he came back, the hammer was covered in blood, and Charlene saw. She didn't want to look at the graves, but Jerry made her go look at it, as if to say, like, "Look what I did, like, I'm so proud." But she was kind of scared. She was like, "Oh my god, why does he want me to go over there? Did he make a third grave, like, just for me?" But Jerry insisted. He led her to the portion of the stream bed left by the little dry creek when it narrowed as the winter runoff slowed. The soil had been softened there, and the digging was easier. There was no third grave, just two little mounds in the armpit of the stream bed. A light breeze rustled the branches of the cottonwoods. It was cold, cold. Charlene remembered how she felt when she was a little girl walking through a cemetery. She was always so cold, so very cold. She remembered, as they stood in the darkness, her teeth were almost shattering because they were so cold, just chattering really hard, He wanted someone to see how well he had done, like I said, and Charlene stood silently at the edge of the little stream bed, not really saying anything, just shivering. So they walked back to the van after she had inspected the graves, collected anything that might be linked back to them as evidence, and then they drove away. Charlene then threw the hammer out of the window of the passenger side when they approached I-80. Stacy Ann Redican. This is chapter 4. Stacy Ann Redican and Karen Chipman misinformed Gerald Gallego when they told him that they would not be missed. So when they failed to keep that appointment with Karen's mother, things got crazy. In Sacramento, at the Sunrise Mall, Marianne Twiggs, Karen's mother, had what she later described as this gut feeling that all mothers get, mother intuition. And she kept feeling like something was really weird, so she went to the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, the police department, and reported these two girls missing later that evening. Stacy had a history of running away, and when Mrs. Twiggs told the police about them, she theorized that they had probably returned to their old habits and the girls ran away together, But she just didn't think that this was normal, but it was reasonable to believe that she had taken off one or more time and enlisted Karen as this companion, So Karen wasn't the runaway, but, maybe she went with her friend. So a search for the two girls was launching, and Stacy's pattern in the past had been to call home, assure her parents that she was unharmed, what was going on, and she never did that. So for Mrs. Twiggs, that gut feeling kept suggesting something else, like, no, they're not runaways, you guys, do your job. So Stacy could not call, and when she didn't, Mrs. Twiggs was certain something had happened to the girls. Karen had never run away and was a conscientious and reliable member of a single-parent family home. So she had been born in Sacramento and lived with her mother in Oregon, Alaska, and Nevada. Stacy Ann Redican was a native of Nevada. She was born in Carson City and moved from there to a suburb in Sacramento. So this was just for a little while. She moved to Sacramento, and the family had returned to Nevada and settled in Reno in 1976, but she spent like 2 years there and hated it. So she went back to Sacramento to the Twiggs home. Arrangements were made for her to live there, where her parents hoped she might be able to make an adjustment to life that she had not accomplished in Nevada. Bulletins were dispatched by the Sacramento Police Department. Posters bearing the missing girls' photographs were distributed, and the merchants in the Sunrise Mall were questioned closely. moments when they had recovered from the shock of their discovery, they drove to the nearest available telephone and called the Lovelock police. Chief of Police Bernie Schneider of Lovelock drove to the Cottonwood Grove to examine the grisly discovery by the picnicking family. The shallow graves prepared by Gerald Gallego had been easily violated by the lean and hungry coyotes who roamed through the sagebrush backcountry of Nevada. Chief Snyder called for help from Sheriff K. McIntosh, the sheriff of Pershing County, who had the bodies transported to Reno when they were autopsied by Dr. James Gauthier the next day. He reported the bodies were those of 2 young women and that they had been bludgeoned to death. An account of the grim discovery in the hills northeast of Lovelock by the picnicking family and Dr. Gauthier's findings was published in the Reno Gazette and the Nevada Journal, as well as broadcasted by Nevada radio and television stations. More than a week passed before Stacy Redigan's mother, apprehensive, frightened, and praying silently that the Washoe County Sheriff's Department with her daughter's dental charts, that her aunt was wrong, but she brought them there. They called Tom Moots, an investigator for the Nevada Bureau of Investigation. Tom is one of about 9 investigators employed by the state of Nevada as a sort of like public traveling agent who kind of goes and helps in these crimes that need more help. So Tom found Stacy's dentist, discovered that another dentist in the same building had handled the dental work for Karen Chipman Twiggs, and asked them to compare their charts of the girls' mouths with Dr. Gauthier's findings during the autopsies. That afternoon, the Twiggs Redigan file was moved from the missing persons to homicide assault by the Sacramento Police Department. A background investigation of the 2 girls was launched by Tom immediately, hoping to find the key to the murders among the people who knew the 2 young women. He talked with their friends, acquaintances, and relatives in Reno as well. When nothing developed in Nevada, he spent weeks in Sacramento and its suburbs, interviewing Karen's mother, her friends of both sexes, every merchant in the Sunrise Mall, and as many people he could find. In a way, Tom was lucky. There were no clues, nor was there a hint of why Karen and Stacy were kidnapped and murdered in a lonely Nevada desert canyon. His investigation did not move ahead, but neither did he get the persistent tips and statements of witnesses, which would send him looking in the wrong direction, as we did while we searched for a murderer of Gibby Vaught and Rhonda Scheffler. Almost 2 years had passed since Rhonda Scheffler and Gibby Vaught were found in the fields near Slaw House. We had every reason to believe that these 2 black men had been the last people seen alive with the young women. We had questioned them